Hello, everyone. I'm Reverend Nick Bullitt, the engagement catalyst here at One Spirit, and I am sitting here today with Kaustubha Das. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's nice to be here with you, Nick.
Great, thank you. We're here to talk about your upcoming workshop that's focused on the Bhagavad-gita, and I would just love to hear a little bit about your professional and spiritual background.
Sure. Well, when I was 21 years old, this was back in the late 80s, I was developing an interest in spirituality. I was reading books like Bhagavad-gita and Upanishads, different Eastern literature. A lot of my friends kind of had an interest in that too. So we got involved in Krishna Bhakti, through the Hare Krishna movement. And through reading those books, they were ringing so true with me that I just kind of developed a deeper and deeper commitment to it. When I was 21, I became a monk, and I lived as a student monk for the next 13 years until I was 34, practicing the path of bhakti yoga, spending a lot of times in India and the ashrams of India and with really great teachers. When I was 33 or 34, I decided that I would get married. I returned to New York and at that time I began to practice Ashtanga yoga, as well as began to work on developing a cultural center in New York City, which is now called the Bhakti Center. So currently I'm the senior educator at the Bhakti Center. And, I help design a lot of the educational programming there, as well as teach a lot of classes outside, like this one with One Spirit that I'm so happy to be doing.
Great. And so what inspired you to create this workshop that we're going to have at One Spirit?
Something that I always wanted to do for many years. I was asked to teach a 1-month course on the Bhagavad-gita last January in India. And although I've given so many courses and studied the Gita for so long, I never had the time to spend with students with like a 1-month in-depth study. And so in order to do that, to prepare for that, I went through that book that I've read and spoken from so many times, but a bit from a different angle. At the same time, I had begun a podcast called Wisdom of the Sages with a friend of mine named Raghunath Kapo. And we had just so many wonderful listeners to that. It's like a community. And I was recognizing that I had lived a certain life that many of those people would never live. They may not have had the chance to be a monk and to live in India and to live in ashrams. They were people dealing with this world that we're living in. They had gone through marriages and having children and working jobs and sometimes heartbreak and sometimes divorce and sometimes tragedy and all of what this world brings us. They were going through without let's say the spiritual training and teachings that I imbibed. But they were eager for that knowledge. And I saw that the combination of that knowledge and their life experience was a very powerful combination where something that is just on the pages of a book, when it's applied to my very real life experiences, comes alive and becomes very powerful. And so perhaps I had a certain pride of my own background and thinking that qualified me spiritually in a particular way. And it really, through doing this podcast, it really began to sink into me how anyone that becomes inquisitive in their life and tries deeply to understand their life's challenges and life's experiences and apply spiritual knowledge to that can bring one to a level of very deep faith and realization. So when I looked at the Bhagavad-gita from that platform, I recognized that Krishna speaks to Arjuna in the Bhagavad-gita on 5 different levels. And I call them duty, knowledge, wisdom, absorption, and love. And when we approach meditational practices, we want to absorb the mind. And we're not so good at it. The mind is very distracted and it's full of intense emotions and it's hard to concentrate it, especially in the world that we live here in New York City or in the Western world. But what I saw was that there was a path there that from knowledge, especially this transition from knowledge, information, spiritual information about this world that we live in and how it works. When that's combined with reflection on that knowledge through one's life's challenges, that knowledge can mature to what's called wisdom. It's really that inspired me, that the Bhagavad-gita, that I saw in it something that I hadn't quite seen before, as not nearly as clearly. that as we go through life's challenges, we not only hear this knowledge from these sacred texts and from good teachers, but there's a path laid out there to reflect on that knowledge. And through that reflection, Krishna calls it in the Bhagavad-gita, Jnana Tapasa, the fire of knowledge. What we know theoretically as book knowledge can become matured into what's called wisdom. Mm-hmm. And wisdom becomes a platform for absorption and ultimately divine love. Being asked to teach that course, it was a chance to look at that same text that I've lived with for over 30 years and understand it in a new and hopefully deeper way.
Right. And can you walk us through what the participants will experience in the workshop?
Yeah, well, we'll go through those 5 stages. Duty, the importance of being dutiful in life. It's the beginning of yoga. It's the beginning of concentrating the mind, where my mind is telling me, do this. And I consciously say, no, I'm going to do what's right. And that's the beginning of becoming a yogi. When we're not controlled by our mind, but we take control of the mind. So we'll discuss how that plays out in one's duties in life, something that was very clearly laid out in these ancient texts in the civilization or the culture that they came from, something that is more confusing and harder to get hold on, I think, in our world, but it's still important that we understand the fundamentals of it. And then some of the very basics of that knowledge that's provided through the Vedic literature, through the Upanishads, through the Bhagavad-gita, basic wisdom about what is this world and what are its influences? Who am I? And ultimately, what is God? And how do I understand these 3 in relation? That's called knowledge, or jnana in Sanskrit. Mm-hmm. So that's stage 2. And again, that was something that someone can theoretically give you duty, give you knowledge, right? As a monk, I was given duties: when to wake up, when to go to sleep, what to study, how to behave in this circumstance, how to, that's something that I can decide I'm going to do today. And knowledge is something that I can learn in a relatively short amount of time. But then maturing it to wisdom, that's something that is far more elusive. That's something, the first 2 I might have gotten relatively quickly, even in my first year as a monk. But going from knowledge to wisdom, where I move through the world, the Bhagavad-gita will call this person a sage of steady mind, that no matter what's happening externally, whether it's hot or cold, whether people are being nice to me or people are being not so nice to me, and whether I'm being praised, whether I'm being criticized, in victory or defeat, whatever the external will be, the nature of this world is that it's always changing. How can I move through this world where even though the externals are changing, I have a steadiness? I'm not rocked by it. That's what the Gita will call a sage of steady mind. And it's that platform. We can call it wisdom. Now it's not just theoretical knowledge, but I'm moving through the world, seeing through these eyes, that it gives me the opportunity to have a mind that's peaceful, to begin to see deeper things in life, to be able to interpret, because my mind's not distracted and disturbed, I can interpret my life's events, the challenges that I face in life, and draw deeper meaning out of them, and also be able to sit still and quietly and actually absorb my mind, which is otherwise always distracted, because as long as the outside is changing and I'm being moved by it, it's very difficult to go within. So that's called absorption. And the faith in these traditions, and so many of these spiritual traditions, is that there are powerful sources of spiritual energy, mantras, for instance, or sacred text, that we can absorb our mind, but because our mind is always distracted, we don't get the full power of it. So when we come to that platform of wisdom, we're moving through the world without being shaken by it, not disturbed by externals, we can actually go within, become deeply absorbed in these sources of spiritual power, spiritual wisdom. And then that ultimately it's through that absorption where divine love arises. So those 5 paths, I think especially we'll spend a lot of time with the maturing from knowledge to wisdom.
So aside from your course objectives of 5 different levels, what do you hope that students take away from taking your class?
I suppose what I really hope for is that these texts and the states of consciousness with which they describe, that students will get a vision that they are not simply they're not like mythology or something that's only for some sages that lived a long time ago up in the mountains and that are inaccessible to me, that I can only kind of romanticize about them or think about them, but that actually, that every one of us can take full advantage of these sacred texts.
Mhm.
And we can develop a strategy in the short lifetime that we have where we'll come to the stage of wisdom. We'll have an even and peaceful mind. We'll learn tolerance and kindness. We'll be satisfied simply and really capable of understanding what the meaning of my life's journey is, feeling connection to God in my heart at every moment and seeing God in everything. That's not impossible, but that actually can be done. I hope that students will walk away feeling like, oh yeah, this isn't just for some special swamis or some, unique people. No, I can take full advantage of this and transform my life.